Chapter 1: The Mental Health Situation. From the beginning, let's dispel the myth that only people diagnosed with a mental health condition need to work on their issues and learn how they function. In conversational self terms, the science of self. There is no human on earth whose health and well being has not been affected in some way by other people's behavior, either by their damaged and traumatized parents, victim of an unjust social system since the beginning of this human race, or by the industrial school and work system and the unconscious people crossing our path every day. None of us is exempt from suffering at the hands of others in this life. The difference between what makes or what breaks us is not only in what happens to us, as the new mental health trend goes, but in why what happened to us happened and what we make of it. The healing of our individual and collective traumas doesn't depend on drugs or therapy. If these are effective, we would see an increase in well-being and a decrease in suffering. Instead, we see an alarming rise in global psychic pain branded and commodified as mental illness. Our healing depends on our coming of age, on our moral and spiritual growth as people. It requires looking our demons in the face and an uncomfortable dose of self-honesty. Ultimately, it requires us to change course before we reach the point of no return. Spending years in therapy is not the solution. It keeps us stuck in the past. It makes us weak. We keep hearing that mental health should have equal standing with physical health. They were undivided anyway until modern medicine took monopoly over the human and split mind and body in different specialists, leaving the spirit to the church. And we all know how far that got us. But what good would it do to you to talk about a broken leg in childhood for years, other than reminding you that you had a broken leg, reinforcing that memory of trauma, and solidifying an identity of infirm? Because if you know anything about how the brain works, the more you think and talk about a problem from that problem's standpoint, the stronger the neural pathways in that direction and the more updated and alive you keep it. Talking about it, unlike what all-state therapy tells you, is not necessary, and it only helps up to a point. The only point of talking to a specialist is not to have a sympathetic ear to validate our point, although to begin with that validation is needed, but talking about our problems for years without putting life itself under any perspective, correcting our lenses of perception and moving one step at a time, building a better self thanks to that experience and not despite it, is nothing more than paid venting. In the past, we had wise men and women guiding their community in their worldly affairs, from health, politics, and spiritual counsel to marital troubles. Today, we have replaced the wise with the lab-made specialist and ancestral wisdom and life experience with degrees. Seeking counsel was often a one-off, forward-oriented endeavor. Today, in our self-centered consumerist world, we are addicted not only to Netflix, drugs, alcohol, and other numbing strategies, but to talking about ourselves and our past ad nauseam. In my 13 years of practice, I have seen people damaged by psychotropics and people confused and weakened by misguided therapy. Unsurprisingly, the ones defending this mad system are its victims. When every chance of social justice has been taken away, they are left to choose between a rock and hard place, sedation or talk therapy. That selfless profession inviting you to take as long as you need to address your issues, as long as somebody pays for it and as long as you don't disturb the status quo. But what if the issue is more complex than choosing between talk therapy and drugs? Psychological pain and its maladaptive behavior are natural human reactions to inhuman living conditions. As such, no drug or therapy will ever work unless the cause is addressed. Indoctrinating the public into a false belief has colossal consequences at individual and socioeconomic level. It removes all sense of agency and responsibility to self-improve. More importantly, it absolves the perpetrators of their responsibility for the damage caused to their victim, their family, and to society. From the outset, a diagnosis of mental illness of a natural response to maltreatment harms in 4 ways. It misattributes the effect of social injustice, abuse, and neglect to the victim's faulty constitution. Otherwise said, one suffers not because the system is corrupt and unfit for human life, but because the victim's mind failed to withstand the abuse and injustice unaffected. It shifts the attention from cause to effect, misguiding is soon doing the treatment. Instead of addressing the cause at its root, instead of treating the abusers, the inequitable socioeconomic system and political corruption, we treat their victims. Instead of educating people to recognize abusive behavior in themselves and others to prevent illness, we come with all kinds of fanciful, scientifically sounding theories and edit out the ugly truth. It gives a free pass to perpetrators and a life sentence to their victims. Instead of addressing the real cause, like implementing laws to raise the minimum wage to reflect the living cost, which will do away with poverty, debt, and all the damage caused to families by poverty and lack of housing opportunities, this corrupt system invents diagnostic and profit-making treatments. 90% of the global population lives in poverty, even if in full-time employment, while the 10% hold the world resources in a tighter trickle-down economy. It stops human progress and a healthy evolution towards a more responsible, egalitarian civilization. The science is clear as to the effects of abuse and social inequalities on health and behavior, even if these studies are the least to see the light. We know the social exclusion and emotional pain have inflammatory effect on the body as the physical pain. We know that neglect and abuse in childhood leads to developmental problems, negative behavior priming, physical illness, lower IQ, lower quality of life, and shorter lifespan. To pick just two studies, 78% of subjects diagnosed with personality disorders suffer from childhood trauma, the majority reporting emotional abuse and neglect. 75.6% of the chronically depressed patients had histories of childhood trauma. We know that people living in poverty are more likely to experience personality disorders, depression, anxiety, and trauma-related conditions. One study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry in 2016 found that people living in the most deprived areas in England had a 50% higher risk of developing mental health problems compared to those living in the least deprived areas. When it comes to the effects of poverty on children's mental health, the UK National Health Service Task for Review clearly states, children from low-income families are at highest risk, 3 times that of those from the highest. Those with conduct disorder, persistent, disobedient, disruptive, and aggressive behavior are twice as likely to leave school without qualifications, 3 times more likely to become a teenage parent, 4 times more likely to become dependent on drugs, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. Yet most children and young people get no support. By support, the NHS means their support, costing the public purse more than 20 billion per year while leaving the problem unaddressed. Not families improve standard of living, access to decent housing, and decent wages legislation support. Their psychological intervention and psychiatric drug support. As if poverty could be talked out of people, reframed with some clever CBT techniques, or medically treated, like homosexuality was treated in the past.